Over the years, having dived into many different horror games, I've often asked myself what my favorite one is. As a child, the first video game I ever played was the original Resident Evil for the PSX. And then as I grew older, I discovered Dead Space and fell in love with it. As I grew older still, I found a love for the run and hide horror games such as Amnesia and Outlast. And finally, most recently, a love for Resident Evil, and now, with the Dead Space remake, Dead Space has returned to me. However, I have found myself with quite an interesting answer in writing this essay. For in writing my most recent essay, I recalled my time playing the original Portal and came to the strange realization that it is my favorite horror game of all time. But Sapphire, that's a fun physics-based puzzle game. That's not meant to be scary, right? At the front, Portal certainly presents itself as a puzzle game full of unique mechanics, but it isn't long into the campaign before the true intrigue takes hold. Bubbling just below the surface is a story of a rogue AI, of mass murders, a scrounging survivor, and a world about to collapse. Portal is, to me, a master of quiet horror, never focusing in on what makes the world terrifying, but instead using that ambivalence to further cement how truly dreadful the world is. You can peek around certain corners, get glimpses of the frightful world that has devoured you, but they will always be glimpses. The true horror hides away beyond the confines of form. But what is quiet horror? How does it shape and form a narrative? Or perhaps let's peek into the dark and hope to spy what awful shapes might crawl out of the nothingness. Left to your own devices, not stranded yet without much other refuge, cold, confused, lost. Antarctica is your prison, and that awful, absent thing, your warden. What is it? How do you describe it? What does it want? Yes. Keep asking yourself those questions. I'm sure the hope you have for their answers will keep you warm as you're torn apart in the dark. How do you run from something that isn't there? Something whose prime assault is to take the form of you. Can you trust those around you? Those who arrive? Gods, can you even trust yourself? And even if you could, would you? Will you ever again? John Carpenter's The Thing, despite what things may seem, is a film built upon the presence of nothing. And I think that is its most enthralling element. Because it's all well and good to show off some grotesque abomination or terrifying alien creature, but I think that often takes away from the horror of it all. It adds some level of expectation. I know what is coming, and I know roughly what it's capable of, and though I'll still run and cower away in the corner of some fool's safe haven, I won't think much of this creature when I'm free from the horror at hand. But absence? That ethereal nothing that looms over the entirety of a book, a film, a game? That nothing will become so many things when I'm finally free from its grasp. I find absence to be a poison in horror. It consumes me, keeps me up in the late hours of the night, infects every cell within my cerebrum. I love a good horror monster. Dracula, the xenomorph, the cleric beast. But did you ever wake up in the middle of the night after viewing a horror whose creature remained absent? Rationally, you know that there is nothing accompanying you in the dark. But that's just it, isn't it? There's nothing there. Nothing is haunting you. The thing has a creature. It has grotesque appearances. It has definable characteristics. It is known by both the characters and the audience. And yet, that isn't quite true, is it? Because every form this creature takes is an imitation of something familiar. And sure, we can understand that this creature's primary ability, perhaps even its primary form, is to mimic that of other life forms, but what does that leave for the thing itself? What is there other than absence? It is peculiar to know such an otherworldly terror, one that seems to take such hideous form, and yet, when left to your description, is completely and utterly nothing. No body, no smell, no sound, just absence. And this isn't even where the quiet horror takes place. No, it's afterwards, when the credits roll, and we think back to MacReady and Charles, the daunting task they have ahead of them. They'll need to recount this tale to those of sound mind when they return home. And when they do, how is it that they will convince them of the quiet terror that is absolutely nothing? Robert Eggers' The Lighthouse might well be my favorite film to implore the idea of absence. There is so much to digest here. This film should be about some cosmic or eldritch deity hidden away in the lighthouse, and yet it is so explicitly not. Throughout the runtime, we get glimpses into so many different worlds. The youngest of the two leads, Tommy, finds an idol of a siren at the beginning of the film, one that keeps calling to him. We later watch him meet this very siren. We see it torment his very existence. At this stage, it feels like that is where the film is going. A siren tormenting a lonely island. Perhaps there are even older, alien things at play here. I'd be a fool not to mention the imagery of Lovecraft's Deep Ones. But that's not everything. Because suddenly, this film about Deep Ones and sirens becomes a character study about two men exploring the very limits of their own desires. Is the tension here homoerotic? Or are we seeing their orders of power and the dues of what those mean? These two men keep edging closer to some precipice of euphoria, and it is unclear whether that is a singular state for them both, or two opposing states that are doomed to fall apart. The Lighthouse is a deafening film. The constant blowing of those damned foghorns silences everything without discrimination. Strange how foghorns, constructed to clear the mist, seem only to further cement the island as something alone. And did I mention the light yet? The older lead, Tom, is obsessed with the thing. It is his light. And Tommy shan't find himself anywhere near the thing. He certainly won't find himself working a shift to mind the light. Is this Tom exerting his authoritarian prowess over his subordinate? Or is Tom a paranoid man, hiding an idol for something old. It's quite hard to follow along at times. Certain events contradict previous ones, which becomes more of a focus when we realize that our dear Tommy is quite the unreliable narrator. There are times where it feels as though we are viewing Tommy's delusions, as though each minute of the film is a spiral further into a deep pit of madness. The boy spends so much of the film swallowed. He sinks further and further into so many different throats, and yet it never truly feels as though Tommy is digested. Tom calls him out in the later moments of the film, suggesting that he may very well be a figment of the boy's imagination brought on by his guilt. But then, Tom is quite the unreliable narrator. You see, both of these men are swallowed by what happened in their past. Fog, loss, guilt. Despite the way that the isolation warps them, I think that given the choice between the loneliness of the island and the loudness of their lives, both of the Toms would choose the light. We're constantly brought back to the titular lighthouse. This seemingly mundane artifact of human perseverance has an otherworldly element to it. Why does the lighthouse feel so alive? Why does it feel so present and overwhelming? What does the lighthouse want? I mentioned before that Tom refuses to allow Tommy anywhere near the light, and that notion is taken to extremes. There are two notable sequences in which Tommy approaches the light whilst Tom is minding it. First, he stands below the hatch and watches as Tom masturbates whilst gazing into the beam. As certain fluids leak down onto Tommy's face, a tentacle slides over the grating above. And second, well, here we get a little bit more experimental. Tommy reveals his guilt to Tom, spilling his beans, so to say. It's unclear how much of this segment is real. Almost none of the events have any lasting effect on the film, and yet the events are referenced later on. In fact, I'm not entirely sure how to explain these events to you, so I'll say this. Tommy finds himself in a sort of dream state. He's standing on top of the lighthouse, next to the light. It's everything he's wanted, and yet the moment feels empty. No, the moment feels wanting, waiting, edging, creeping. Something is on its way. And that something is Tom. He catches Tommy, and we enter a series of flashing moments. Tommy falling from the tower, the pair fighting. Tom grabbing a fallen Tommy by the arm, stark naked, and recreating Sasha Schneider's hypnosis. That last one is perhaps the most striking to me. For just a few frames, we are taken out of everything to view art of all things. Now, at this climactic moment of the film, and sure, the artwork referenced is certainly pertinent to the situation at hand, but in the moment, it feels so above that. It doesn't even feel as though the director wanted to create an artful shot. No, it feels as though Tom and Tommy came to life and screamed outward at the lens through the recreation of a painting. And then it's gone. We don't ever talk about it again. It may well have not happened. It is burnt into my eyes as one of the most incredible moments in film I have had the pleasure of viewing. And yet it is so loudly absent. Strangely, This mismatched scene of experimental jargon is perhaps the clearest voice to describe what this film is about, because there is so much going on, and yet nothing seems to happen. As I said, these events are referenced later on in the film, but the actual physicality of them doesn't seem to hold any lasting impact on any of the characters. These empty scenes, well, they may well have not happened, but if they didn't, then the film loses so much of its meaning. It is the duality of presence that this film is so hell-bent on playing with. It's the absence. At the end of the film, Tommy kills Tom. Sorry, that's not quite accurate to what Tommy does to Tom. Tommy, having bested Tom in combat, screams at the old man, who whimpers, "You're killing me!" He then forces the old man onto all fours, makes him bark like a dog, and walks him out to the place in which he will force him to bury himself alive. Yeah. Tommy doesn't just kill Tom. He makes him dig his grave, sit in it, and fill it up. With Tom gone, Tommy finally ascends the lighthouse stairs, limping, barely able to make it to the top unassisted. But he does. We then watch as the beacon light turns to face Tommy. A door opens, light shines on his face, Tommy gazes in, and nothing. All we get is Tommy's crazed laughter before he tumbles back down those stairs and dies at the base of the tower. So what was in the lighthouse? Was there some eldritch beast that drove these two characters to madness? I don't know. We get absolutely nothing but absence. Though, if you ask me, there was nothing in the lighthouse. And that final absence is what drove Tommy to end his own life. In the light, Tommy faced the quiet terror of absolutely nothing. If you've not seen The Lighthouse, it might be hard to understand it as a horror from that description alone, but that's the beauty of absence. It's horror that hides in the hidden cracks of your brain and haunts you when you least expect it. A seemingly harmless tale can suddenly wake you in a cold sweat at midnight, hiding in the empty corners of your bedroom. It is this very idea of absence, after all, that so enthralled me with Portal when it first booted up on my computer way back in 2010. I mentioned earlier that Portal allows you glimpses into the frightful world it exists within, so perhaps let's peek around one of those corners. Throughout your time in the Enrichment Center, you may happen across a small space dug away into the walls. It happens first in Chamber 16. There is an eerie stillness in the air here, a stark splattering of rusted metal and scribbled graffiti to contrast the clean test chambers you're used to. It is clear that someone else is living within the Enrichment Center, eating cans of beans, writing messages that seem oddly targeted to you. But there's no one here. So, after digging around and exploring for a few quiet minutes, you'll return to the testing and try to forget about the crack in the wall. But then you see the observation window. It's so empty. The windows are dead and the walls are alive. Where did all the window people go? I could, from here, talk about Portal's backstory. How GLaDOS killed the entirety of the staff team with
a deadly neurotoxin.
How everyone suffered, including the only two survivors, the main character Shell, and the man in the walls, Doug Ratman. But what would it matter? Almost none of it is present in the game itself. Instead, you'll need to play the Portal ARG and read the Ratman comic. In the game, we get snippets of the greater lore, but we're mostly left with this overwhelming absence. Ratman seems to be near. Heck, in Portal 2, through the walls of one of his dens, you can hear him mumbling. And yet, even with such a lively presence, his dens feel like voids next to those empty observation windows. You should be having fun solving physics-based puzzles with the coolest tool in all of sci-fi. But instead, you're hiding away in the walls and wondering where everybody went. You attempt to kill the rogue AI, GLaDOS, at the end of the game, returning the favor she had attempted on you. And it would seem that you succeed. Her body is blown to pieces and the two of you lay, defeated on the surface. Only, you're dragged back down into the pit below, to a room with a phantasm cake that you'd been teased with all throughout the game. It's quiet, and then GLaDOS, dead, sings. This was a triumph. I'm making a note here, huge success. It's hard to overstate my satisfaction. Aperture science. We do what we must because we can. For the good of all of us, except the ones who are dead. But there's no sense crying over every mistake. You just keep on trying till you run out of cake. And the science gets done, and you make a neat gun for the people who are still alive. The song, Still Alive, is quite cheery. GLaDOS shows some genuine care for Shell in her words. Perhaps this is even an early sign of Caroline coming through, but that's neither here nor there. What is poignant are those two words, still alive. GLaDOS makes repeated mention of the people that are still alive. It's almost as if she knows something. In fact, it's almost as if she's afraid of something, of someone. In the final chorus, GLaDOS remarks, upon thinking of Shell returning to the surface world, that when she looks up there, it makes her glad she's not. Oh, I do apologize for the interruption. My employers thought my presence would be beneficial here. Ease you in, so to say. Not that I wish to imply you would have been led astray without me. Only, I have a particular experience with the matter at hand. So why don't we just step on here, out of the pit, to smell the ashes. The world above is in ruin. You see, Aperture Science were not the only major science division with a breakthrough in teleportation technology. An undisclosed amount of time before the events of Portal, a man named Gordon Freeman was involved in an experiment with unforeseen consequences. The Black Mesa incident was catastrophic, an assault of interdimensional portals opening endlessly on the Earth. Creatures from the far reaches of science fiction crawling through the gates, living zombies, green lightning-throwing cyclops, a giant deep below, government and in-house cover-ups. And who is that man in the business suit? Thankfully, theoretical physicist Dr. Gordon Freeman, armed with his trusty crowbar in absolute silence, employed himself as the savior of humanity and did everything it took to get the portals to close. And it worked. He fought his way through the possessed bodies of Black Mesa scientists, crawling through the vents, scouring every inch of the facility. But of course, I already spoiled the ending for you, didn't I? The world ends in ruin. Gordon does seemingly save everyone. He travels to the alien realm of Zen to take on the creature at the heart of all of this portal storm disaster, the Nihilanth. But have a listen to some of the Nihilanth's voice lines.
Their slaves we are, their slaves we are. The last, I am the last. The truth, you can never know the truth.
Strange. Not quite the tyrannical type you would expect. And what's that around the creature's wrists? You see, Half-Life is only half of the story. The Nihilanth wears shackles around its wrists, and so too do the Vortigons. The Gargantua and Brutes seem to be far too mechanical to be unaltered beings, and there are factories on Zen producing the latter of those two creatures. There's something else here, lurking, hidden away, not in the shadows, but in complete and utter absence. An entity, or entities, that have seized control of the Zenian inhabitants. Inhabitants that aren't native, have been forced into labor, mushed together into an army of reflections, combined. Not long before the events of Portal, planet Earth was once again invaded. Only this time, Gordon Freeman was locked away in stasis by the mysterious entity known only as the G-Man. Very little is known about this invasion. It happened suddenly and was perpetrated intentionally by the entities that enslaved the creatures of Zen. The armies consisted of augmented creatures, much like the Gargantua and Brutes. Military organisms, indistinguishable from machines. Earth fought back and made very little ground. But perhaps what is most terrifying about this invasion is the name that it was given. The 7-Hour War. In just 7 hours, an unknown enemy overwhelmed the forces of the Earth and forced them to surrender their own freedom. In effect, they agreed to become the slaves of this entity. The entity is known as the Combine. And that's it. That is all that we concretely know about this entity. I could talk about theories. I could discuss the events of the seemingly cancelled Half-Life 3. I could talk about so many things here, but none of it matters. Because all that we concretely know about the Combine is nothing. This enemy that never presented itself, never gave any inkling as to what it might want, overwhelmed the Earth in just 7 hours. And then they proceeded to drown the survivors in a flooding of absence. Do you want to know how the Combine keep the survivors of Earth in check? Rather than point weapons at our throat, they deprived us of everything that made us unique. We open Half-Life 2 on board a train and learn throughout this opening that people are being relocated in an endless cycle to different cities. There's a man who claims that the water has been contaminated. He doesn't remember who he was before he arrived in City 17. In fact, as far as we know, City 17 might well be the only city left. Another lie to keep humanity in check. Moving forward, possessions are stripped away. Discarded luggage can be seen everywhere, and reproduction has been made impossible thanks to the Combine's suppression field. The Combine refuse our ability to have anything, any hope, any reason to fight against them. The Combine don't fear a rebellion, because they left humanity with nothing to rebel for. That being said, there is a police force, civil protection. That force is dressed in otherworldly armor with their face and voices completely masked. They look alien, only they aren't. Civil protection is made up of human volunteers, all whom are offered different freedoms for doing so. The citywide AI, Overwatch, can be heard promising and removing these freedoms as civil protection fight Gordon Freeman throughout the game.
Reminder: memory replacement is the first step towards rank privileges. Rank leaders. Reminder: 100 sterilized credits qualifies non-mechanical reproduction simulation.
There is so much despair in City 17. The houses are so empty, and the ones that aren't may as well be. The people there have nothing. They don't even know what is left for them to have. The Combine invaded. They won. But they won't let humanity lose. Not entirely. Half-Life is perhaps most famous for its absence, be it in the often distant storytelling, the mystery of the G-Man, or in the fact that Valve still have not released a third and final episode. And of course, there is what's most striking to me, the Combine's use of absence as a weapon. We still don't really know what the Combine are, just what they do. They could be an alien race of their own, they could be a rogue AI. Perhaps my most favorite theory is that they don't exist at all, and that this constant destruction, augmentation, and slavery of life forms is something that began out of pure delusion. Regardless of what they are, the Combine and the story of Half-Life as a whole is a masterclass on how absence creates horror. Look at me still talking when the science do. When I look out there it makes me glad I'm not you. I've experiments to run, there is research to be done on the people who are still alive. I love the way that Portal refuses to allow any of Half-Life's canonical lore to overshadow its own narrative, whilst also refusing to allow the player to forget that it is right there. Finishing the game with Still Alive was genius. A song full of so much goofy fun, much like how the main game is. And yet, if you stop and listen for just a moment too long, you are filled with this unforgettable dread. That idea, the people that are still alive. I don't think it's the notion that some people aren't alive anymore that is most terrifying. I think it's that single, lonesome word. Still. The air is so still in the Ratman's dens, even with the constant rattling of ventilation ducts. Still, I can't help but feel movement in these places. Perhaps see is the correct word. Those empty observation windows that are haunted by the people that should still be alive. Those places seem blind compared to these walled-off crevices. Much like Macready and Childs and their account of that creature in Antarctica, or like the two Toms and their unending need for the thing in the light. I don't think I will ever be able to explain that despite being blinded by the walls of the Ratman's dens, I swear that within them, I can still see what's outside. Oh, and just one more thing. Rise and shine, Mr. Freeman. Rise and shine. Not that I wish to imply you have been sleeping on the job. No one is more deserving of a rest, and all of the effort in the world would have gone to waste if not for, well, let's just say your hour has come again. The right man at the wrong time can make all of the difference in the world. So wake up, Mr. Freeman. Wake up and smell the ashes.
I didn't see you get on.